Hello, hello. Thank you for joining me today. Today is a really important topic. We are going to talk about all of the different types of school options that we have as parents. So before I get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Anastasia Arauz, and I am a family therapist, a family coach. I've been working with parents and kids for years, and it's all I know. And so one of the big topics that comes up with families is school options or school choices or what to do about school. There are so many choices now. Like, it's crazy, all of the different options that we have as parents. So I thought I would give you guys a little history of the school in the United States, like how it all started, why it is the way it is now, and that we do have choices. It doesn't have to be just send your child to the neighborhood school unless that's something you want, right? But there are so many questions you need to be asking when deciding what kind of school to put your child in. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me share my screen with you so you can see the PowerPoint. So as you can see there, it says school options, so many. It is so hard to know what to do. Okay, so let me see if I can show you guys this slideshow. All right. Okay. All right, so why are there so many options now? Why? Well, I was going to actually do this a few days ago, but then as I started thinking about it, researching it, I realized there's so much information on schools and choices and options and all the things that I had to really sit down and do my own work before I did this presentation with you guys. So basically, from what I read, it all makes sense. It's basically, we started back at the beginning from when education started here in the United States, right? So when we had COVID, everyone was at school, at home doing school. And that's basically where it all started, right? So before there was public schools, people were at their homes teaching their kids, and it did not work well. And that's why public schools got started, right? So we all learned that a few years ago during COVID, that it was really tough to teach kids at home. So that is one of the reasons there's so many options now. Public schools are changing. The research on schooling and the different type of schooling for kids is now available. Parents want different experiences for their kids. And then there's also the government really has gotten involved with public schools, and funding has changed. There's different expectations in the classroom, and people just aren't as satisfied with them as they were, say, when I went to school. So a little bit about the history of education. So it was about 200 years ago when it all started, right? So it's not that old in the big scheme of things. I mean, 200 years is a long time, but not when you think about like humanity, or if you're in Europe, how long education's been around. I don't know, there's a history, but it's going to be longer than 200. There was very few public schools back then. And the reason that most people even wanted to learn anything was so they could learn to read the Bible, right? So parents would teach their kids so they were reading the Bible and they could read the word. So that's how it all started. It was not going great. So then around the 1600s, if you had 50 or more people in your town, you had to have some kind of schooling, a public school, right? So that was kind of where it started. And it was just boys. Forget about us girls. Didn't matter. They could sometimes learn in some places, but it usually cost money. But the schooling initially was just boys, and it was because it wasn't going well at home. Around the 1700s, wealthier people started sending their kids, to the boys, to the Ivy League schools. So you would go to school just so you could get to the Ivy Leagues, which are still around today, right? We know all the Ivy League schools. And that was mostly for the wealthy people. Around the Revolutionary time, Thomas Jefferson decided that he felt like everybody should be in school, but not everybody agreed with him. So they ended up, the Constitution, right, which we all know about, put education in the hands of the states. So every state had different ways of determining how they wanted their people to be educated. Well, that did not go well either, because there's so many different laws. There wasn't equal education for everyone. So some had no school. Slaves couldn't go to school. Some slaves could go to school, or African Americans could go to school if they lived in the North. So it was just not equal. It wasn't appropriate for everyone. And it needed to be. So they decided that around the 1900s that everyone should be going to school, and that everyone had to go to pretty much elementary school. Now, this isn't perfect because you still had a lot of people that weren't in school, especially if they were poor or they were Black or they were not in a big area. They might not get the education that they need. All right, so then in 1910, from what I've read, is when the structure changed. So initially it was just like that one-room schoolhouse. About the early 1900s, it went from elementary, middle, and high school. So that's when you started with like the 3 buildings, with the 3 different places kids would go to school. So really, this whole schooling thing isn't super, super old. And it was a way for people to start to read, and so everyone could get educated. Around the 1960s, the school voucher program started, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. I did not realize it started in the 60s. I thought it was like soon, like closer to now. In 1974, charter schools started, which I'm going to talk about. And then in the early 2000s is whenever the No Child Left Behind started. And I used to be a teacher, actually, and I remember all that. And that's whenever the standardized tests really went to the teacher teaching to that, making sure all the kids understood that. So it was less about learning and more about just that testing, right? Then we had COVID 2020, and it put us all back to the very beginning to where we're all at home again. So it's like this big circle, right? Now there's just a ton of options for us all. We can go back to public school, private, charter, magnet, all the different places that you have options for. So we're going to go over those and just some things you could ask yourself when you're trying to decide where you want to send your child to school. Okay. So different types of schools. You can see on my list, and I'm going to kind of go through them. You have private schools, religious, non-religious, public charter schools, public traditional schools, public magnet schools. You have virtual schools, home schools, learning pods, and you might not even know what all of these are. So I'm going to go through them with you. So we all know about public schools, right? So that's whenever the local, state, and federal government are in charge. They're in charge of the testing, the books your kids read. They're in charge of the tests that they're taking, all the things in the school. The teachers have to follow a curriculum. It's standardized, and it's part of the public education system. Okay, charter schools. Now, if you remember, I said back in 1974, the charter schools, that's when they got started. Basically what that is they get funding from the government, but it is that they are in like a charter with the local public education area. And so they have to follow some kind of guidelines, but it's not perfect, right? So they have their own, like decision-making, their own curriculum, but they have to follow a loose set of rules, right? And they can lose funding if they don't do what is really needed and the kids aren't able to score, I guess, on certain tests. So that's a charter school, and it's free because it's funded by the government. And then there's magnet schools. I worked in magnet schools for years. I love magnet schools. I love my experience there. So usually they specialize in an area like math or technology, science, arts, language, something where they specifically specify in a certain type of like subject. And like magnet schools I worked in were typically in a low income area, and they would bring kids in to try to mix everybody up. So you have all types of kids in one building. And the ones I was at, like I was at a gifted and talented one, I loved it. I loved having all the different types of kids. Kids would just really, really blossom in that area. I love the magnet. All right, so then there's public virtual school, which is now typically done online, right? And you can combine that with the homeschool model. So you're going to do all your schooling online. You don't have to actually go to a building, but it's still run by the public government. All right. Then you have private schools. Those are fee-based. They can be profit or nonprofit schools, right? You have boarding schools, which include the food and lodging. They can be for really gifted children. They can be for children that have behavior issues. They can be for very wealthy children. There's all types of boarding schools as well. There's also language immersion schools. So those are schools where you would send your child to learn a different language, and all they're taught in all day long is in that language. There's Montessori schools. I love Montessori as well. My child went to Montessori from preschool all the way through 3rd grade, and it was a great experience for our family. A little bit about Montessori is that they honor individuality, their specific interests, lots of hands-on, lots of exploration, lots of questioning, and you want your child to experience as much as they can in the classroom. And those are done in 3-year communities. So it would be like your 3, 4, and 5-year-olds together, So it would be like preschool, and kindergarten class together. And then you would have first, second, and third together. And you stay with those same kids in that same learning group for 3 years. That was a good experience. You have private special ed schools. So if you have a child with like a disability or some cognitive learning issue, there would be private schools for that as well. There are parochial schools, which are religious, private, church-funded schools where you might not have to pay a tuition. The church would fund the school. There's religious schools where you do pay a fee, but there is some religious teachings around the education that goes on. And finally, there are learning pods, which is basically when you get a group of kids together and you do homeschool combined with like a virtual school, maybe a virtual private school or public school, and you work together in teams or pods. Those came about during COVID, and they're still really popular from what I've been reading, which I think is kind of cool. So that is a ton of choices. And I will put some link, or I'll give you guys some PDFs of some of the things I've talked about so you can read back through them. But as a parent now, you do have a lot of choice. And so you do need to be very educated on what kind of school you want to send your child to. It does not have to be just the public school. And for some kids, that is not even the best option, depending the type of child that you have. So it's really, really important to think about that specific child. All right. So how do you decide the best option? All right, research. Do your research for where you live, the community you're in. Every single community is different. You're going to need to talk to parents. You're going to need to research online. You're going to need to go to schools to see what feels good to you, what feels right. Every child is different, right? So you need to know your kids. I've worked with some families where one child might go to the private school, but the other one goes to public, right? So everybody's different. Maybe both kids go to the public school. I had one family that each of their children went to 2 different private schools based on the type of learner they were. So it really, really just depends on what you want to do for your family. So know your child, know what you want out of your child's education. What are you looking for? Do you want just traditional public education and you're fine with that? Do you want something different or something more? Do you want more language immersion? Do you want them to learn more about some technology, right? So do you want it more to be magnet? Does your child have special needs, right? Is there a child, someone that has a learning disability or a cognitive disability, like, well, learning disability, yeah. Or maybe they have autism or something like that. What kind of special need does your child have? Is your child gifted? Are they very, very bright to where general education is just going to be very simple for them and they could get bored and they could cause problems with behavior, or they could get left out, or they could not excel as much as they need to. So you really, really need to know your family. This is such an individual decision, but talking to people, researching will help you figure out that choice for your family. So I have here, know your family's goals, their values, their beliefs, really, really important. And so I put this quote here because I love it. An investment in knowledge pays the best interest, Benjamin Franklin. So you need to think of education for your child as an investment, because it is, right? It's for them to be the best human that they could possibly be. And so really think of it like that. It's a really, really big decision. And you have so many, many choices. And even like with private schools or religious schools, there are so many ways. If you don't have the money, because it's expensive, there are so many ways to get funded. Many of these schools have their own scholarship programs. There's funding from the government that can be through the vouchers. I mean, if you want something, you can figure it out. It's just a matter of taking the time to do it. All right. So hold on, let me look. There was something else I wanted to tell you. All right, moving on. All right. So where do you start your research? All right. So know that this is going to take time. This isn't something that you're just going to be like, hey, let's do this. Especially if you're interested in finding more information. So make sure you plan that out. This is a great time of the year to start planning for what you're going to do in the fall. Actually, we're kind of, right now, the beginning of February is when a lot of schools start taking new applications. They start looking at new students to come in. So doing school visits, researching schools online, this is a perfect time to do all that. So know what you want for your family, right? Remember we just talked about that. Know what you're looking for your family specifically. You need to visit schools, talk to parents, research online. These are a few websites you could look at. Great schools, most people have heard of. This Micro School Revolution, they had this really interesting quiz where you could take it. It's free. And basically, you would answer questions based on your child and what they're like. And that'll kind of give you a answer of what type of school would be good for them. And the nation's report card will tell you how different schools or different states are performing educationally. And then you can look up all your schools that you're interested, right? So you're going to want to start maybe journaling. So say you live in a community, you would just start brainstorming what kind of schools you might want to do for your child. And then from that, write down specific schools you're interested in. And then from there, look them up, look up the schools, which schools really resonate with you. Maybe talk to some parents in your neighborhood, talk to friends, then go to visit the school, go to visit the classrooms, look and listen to the teachers, talk to the principal, get to know the school staff. I will tell you, after working in schools many, many years, the parents that were most connected with the schools had children that succeeded the best, right? So I worked as a teacher for years, and then I was also a school counselor. So I was in the office and I was also in a classroom. And the parents that I knew that were very connected in the PTA or came by the school or picked up their kids or came and talked to me, their children usually did pretty well. And we had a connection, and the parent was connected to the school, and we worked together. So it's really, really important to form that connection with the schools more than you know. So then here's my other favorite quote: education is what remains after one is forgotten what is learned in school. How true is that, right? So we've all been to school, some type of school at this point, right? And so most of what you've learned, part of it was in school, and the rest of it's life knowledge, right? So giving your child the opportunity to learn life knowledge in the place that suits them in the best is so important to help them grow. So I think that's my last slide. It is. Alrighty. Okay, so a couple things I want you to think about as you do your research. Here's some questions I thought that you could start to think about. Say you're journaling. So get out your journal, and these are some things you want to possibly think about as you begin to research and explore the type of school you want for your child. Okay, number one. Would you want your child to be in a small or large class? What would they do better in, small or large class? Would they be better off in the same school as their friends or somewhere different? Are there school resources such as music programs, gifted programs, sports, clubs? Is the distance to and from the school something you can handle? How will your child get to school if it isn't in the neighborhood? Is there public transportation an option? Would you need to take them? Are you able to take them? If it's a high school, how many kids graduate from the school versus dropping out? That's a community question too to be thinking about. How much does the school cost? Are there extracurricular fees for programs, even if it's public school? If your child has additional needs like developmental delays, how well can the school support that? I will tell you, many private schools cannot. However, you are able to use the resources in the public schools, and I can give you more about that if you're interested. Will you be expected to be involved in the school, and how much participation is required? Now, when we were at Montessori, this was a huge part of the agreement and contract we signed. We had to be very involved. It wasn't even really a choice. We had to have volunteer hours. We had to participate in the classroom. There was a lot that we had to do. Are there online homework and learning options for your child? I think this is a great one. If it's a high school choice, can your child earn college credit in the classes? This is great now because so many kids can start earning college credit like in 10th grade, right? What is the student-teacher ratio? What security measures does the school have in place? We have all these issues with guns now. So what are the security measures that are in place for the school? So here's some questions to think about yourself. Do you want to participate in the classroom? Are you interested in doing that? What is the parent-teacher communication like? And that's something you can ask with school forms, and then find app services, which we talked about before with the special ed. So what I want you to do is just take time to journal, talk to friends and family, read online, listen to podcasts, books. There's so much you can do. It's a really interesting topic. I never realized how much was on it until I started really going through, like Googling and researching and looking and how much information there is on schools right now. But if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. And I hope this helps. I hope you guys have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Bye.